All right, so if you have your bulletin, you can go ahead and open them up. If you want to follow along in the sermon notes section, we've got some fill-in-the-blanks for you this morning. We're going to continue, of course, with our study through the Gospel of Matthew. This is number 77 for us. We're drawing so close. We're coming. By the end of the year, we will have made it through our 2-year kind of rush through the Gospel of Matthew. Today, we're going to talk about these parables of judgment in Matthew chapter 25. So, obviously, Matthew chapter 24, we looked at what is sometimes called the Olivet Discourse, or sometimes referred to as the Little Apocalypse. And we spent 3 weeks sort of unpacking that. So this is the natural kind of continuous teaching on that material, because we talked about how in the Olivet Discourse, or the Little Apocalypse in 24, how the majority of it is actually focused on what was going to happen, still future from Jesus in the year 70 AD, right? With the destruction of Jerusalem, the judgment that came upon Jerusalem. And then as we came to the last part of that, he switches his focus and began talking about the judgment and the second coming of Christ portion there. So he's now kind of continuing on with that theme and talking in parables now. So the big idea that I have for you today is very, very simply this. The day of the Lord's return and judgment is coming, and some will be ready for it, but many will not. Some will be ready for the Lord's return, and some will not be ready for the Lord's return. And so Jesus is going to walk us through with these parables, and this is going to be essentially the theme of these 3 parables of judgment that we're going to observe from the mouth of Jesus this morning. So if you're following along and you want your first fill-in-the-blank, it's right here. The parable of the virgins speaks to readiness versus unreadiness for the day of judgment in terms of wisdom and foolishness. So when Jesus is talking in this first parable that we're going to dive into in a moment, we've got this readiness versus unreadiness theme, but he couches it in terms of if you are ready, you are wise, but if you are unready, that's on account of foolishness. It's on account of foolishness. So wisdom and foolishness are the 2 fill-in-the-blanks for your first point. Wisdom and foolishness. Matthew chapter 25, and we're going to read verses 1 through 13. This is something I don't normally do. We're actually going to get through an entire chapter in one sitting. So hold on to your seats. Okay. Matthew chapter 25, starting in verse 1. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a cry, "Here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "Since there will not be enough for us and for you, go rather to the dealers and buy for yourselves." And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered, "Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." And this is one of the last things that Jesus said in the portion of the Little Apocalypse, the Olivet Discourse, when he began talking about the actual moment of the return of the Lord. Remember, we talked about how for ages people have been like kind of making charts and guessing and trying to figure out when the Lord was going to come back, and people are still doing it to this day, and how from the very mouth of Jesus we have this thing that says look, you can't figure it out. So maybe stop trying, right? Stop trying to do the math. Stop trying to find the hidden code behind the words because there isn't one. Stop it. Because there is no way to figure this out. It is going to be swift and sudden and unexpected when the Lord returns. It could happen at any moment. It could happen in the middle of my sermon, which would be really interesting. No? All right, we'll keep going. But it is this unguessable thing, the return of the Lord. And this parable is in that vein. He actually ends with that same sort of idea. Nobody knows when the Lord is going to return. Nobody knows the day or the hour. He even uses that same phrase. But let's go ahead and back up and begin looking at this parable in a little bit more depth. So there are all of these elements that we have. There are these virgins, there's this bridegroom, and then there's this marriage feast. And these are all general pictures and images that are pointing us to this moment of the return of Christ. And the virgins are the people who are you and me. We're the people who are waiting for the bridegroom, who is Jesus Christ, to come back and draw us and bring us and take us to the wedding feast, or to this moment of celebration of the Lord's return. Because for some of us, it is going to be quite celebrative. It is going to be an amazing, unguessable in terms of its beauty and its magnificence and its just awe-inspiring depth. Just as we don't know the day or the hour of the return, we cannot even begin to guess at the amazing depth of beauty and astonishment that we are going to experience when Jesus shows up unexpectedly at a moment we have not anticipated, and he's going to draw us into something that we cannot begin to guess at. So we're the virgins in the parable, the people who are awaiting the return of the bridegroom. The bridegroom is, of course, Jesus Christ, who is going to come at an unexpected hour, just like in the parable. And then the marriage feast is the moment of Christ's return. It's the establishment of his perfect, beautiful, just kingdom on the earth, something that we've never seen before. The world has never witnessed a truly just king. Has never witnessed a truly just kingdom where all that goes on, all that is trafficked within its borders and beyond, is now somehow without flaw and precisely what we will all need. This is what I need you to understand, because we've talked about, I've mentioned these are parables of judgment, and there's judgment that's going on here. But when we hear the word judgment, we often sort of immediately run to this punishment moment. Judgment involves punishment, but that's not what judgment is at its core. What judgment is at its core is that which is not right set right. That which is bent and broken is straightened and repaired and set to be the way it was always meant to be. And that means that for those who have received Christ, for those who have placed their faith in Jesus Christ, have received eternal life from him, we are going to be more right than we've ever been, which is probably by miles much more than we've ever could possibly have imagined. But it's Jesus is rewarding, he's giving goodness, he's dispensing blessing in judgment to those who have given themselves and entrusted themselves to him. Judgment is a good thing. Judgment is when those, for example, who are oppressed, and we think of our brothers and sisters in Christ in Afghanistan right now, for those who are underneath the threat of oppression or the actual experience of oppression, have that set right for them. Have the wrong that was visited upon them set correct. and those then that have perpetrated the wrong are also corrected. So there's the blessing of the righteous, or those who have been made righteous by Christ, and then also the punishment of the wicked. Both of these things together are the complete picture of what judgment is. And so the virgins and the bridegroom and the marriage feast. But there's actually some more to it than this as well. There are these virgins, and they have with them these lamps, because they apparently assume that part of this activity is going to be during the night, because we have no idea how to do a wedding, right? We go to it like a wedding is kind of an afternoon thing. When they did a wedding, it lasted like days, right? If you remember, if you have ever read the Gospel of John, and very early in Jesus' ministry, it's actually kind of the first miracle that's recorded of Jesus. He's at a wedding feast, and they've run out of wine, and he takes water and he turns it into wine and all that. But why did they run out of wine? Well, because they've been at it for days. They've been going for a while by this point. And this is why Jesus then converts the water to wine and does that miracle. Which is sort of the signal of the celebrative truth and the wedding. And there's wedding imagery there, obviously, and wedding imagery here. And those two are actually connected because they're celebrative. They're the joining of things that were separated and bringing together, as God will join heaven and earth in a magnificent way that we can't imagine. But there are these virgins who have these lamps. They have these lamps because they expect this to last maybe a while. And 5 of them, rather, are foolish, and 5 of these virgins are wise. And the foolish ones don't bring any oil for their lamps, and the wise ones do. Now, I don't want us to get a little bit overboard in trying to pick out the symbolism and saying, well, the lamps represent light and the oil represents the holy. We don't need to go that deep with parables, though some people will do that sometimes. There's a basic idea of preparedness and wisdom versus unpreparedness and foolishness that's at play here with the lamps and the oil. That's the main thing that's being said with these. These are symbols that indicate preparedness or carelessness for Christ's return. Everybody has the lamps. Everybody has the oil, but not everybody has the oil with them because they haven't prepared well, while some have. The righteous prepare for the return of the Lord. The wicked do not, or the foolish do not, because that's the nature of righteous versus wicked, or wise versus foolish. One knows that Christ is going to return, though we don't know when, and one is unconcerned about it, so does not properly prepare. That's what these images are going towards. Everybody has both of these things, but the question is, how are we handling our time until Christ returns? Are we handling it wisely by getting ready for the return of the Lord, or are we handling this foolishly by just sort of, I'll do whatever I feel like doing at any given moment and not give very much thought to it? This is wisdom versus foolishness, giving consideration to what does it mean to be ready for the return of the Lord, versus not really thinking about it much. And if you're a person who doesn't really think about it much, you may want to rethink that, because the Lord is going to return. We don't know when. We don't know kind of exactly what that's going to be like, but we do know that for sure it will happen. The Lord will return. Are we preparing as if it were in the next day, in the next 20 minutes, in the next week? If you had a month and somebody mystically somehow said to you, we know for sure the Lord's going to return in a month, what would you do differently? How would that be different for you? Would it make a difference? Or would it be, well, I've been preparing for the Lord's return, so I'm just going to continue doing that? Or would you kind of go, I never really thought about that. Maybe I should look at and evaluate some things that I'm doing with my life and say, well, maybe I ought to make some changes. Am I ready? Are you ready? If Jesus were to show up in a week, a month, even a year, if you had a year, what would you do differently? This is the question that the virgins, the wise versus foolish, some don't know how to answer, or haven't really given much thought to, and some of them are absolutely prepared for. Are you expecting to attend this wedding? And if so, what does that look like? What difference does it make? So the wise are those who are ready for Christ's return by receiving salvation by grace through faith. That's the first thing. Not the only thing, but the first thing that we do. The foolish are those who rely upon anything else to get them ready for the return of Christ, or relying on anything else apart from receiving Christ for salvation. Let's talk for a second about things that can't save you. We could be here all day, right? Your morals, those can't save you. Your intelligence, your smarts, those can't save you. Knowing and having a close relationship to somebody who knows Christ, that can't save you. You can't say, well, I've got an in because I know Frank and Frank's going to go. I'm going to be his +1, right? No, that's not how this works. How it works is you have to be personally invited by the bridegroom. You got to know him. You got to know him. You have to say, Jesus, I'm yours, and mean that. Like and trust yourself to him. Put your faith in him. Receive his salvation. These are things that will save you. Things that won't. Morals, smarts, relationships to the saved. All of those sorts of things. Religious activities. Well, I check the box, I pray once a day. I check the box, I read my Bible for 10 minutes today. I check the box because I went to church this week. I check the box. Nope. If you have not received Christ, if you have not received Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, if you have not entrusted yourself to him, you're not invited. You're not invited. That's something that needs to change. And this is the way that parable concludes, is that after the bridegroom and the 5 wise virgins, the attendants of the wedding, go into the wedding, the door is shut. The door is shut, indicating there's a moment where this opportunity will cease. You're not going to get to a point where you will perpetually have forever to make this decision to follow Christ. Time is a limited reality. Time is limited. You don't have forever. And one of two things will prevent a person from making that decision on time, whether they die without having made that decision, or Christ returns without them having made that decision. Those are the two kind of kickers. So don't wait until it's everlasting too late, because there is a moment where that's a very real thing. There is this moment where Jesus Christ closes the door. And you'll notice this moment where the unwise attendants, the unwise virgins come to the door and they knock and they open and they cry out, "Lord, Lord, let us in." It's not dissimilar to what Jesus says at the end of Matthew chapter 7. Many will say to me that day, "Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not cast out demons? Did we not do all of these miracles?" And Jesus will turn and say to them, "Depart from me, I never knew you, you workers of lawlessness." Just because you think you've done the right activities doesn't mean that you are part of those who belong. There is a line that has to be crossed, and it's the line of faith in Christ. We have to see that moment occur, or the results here are eternal. The results are eternal either way. Gospel ministry is temporary. what I'm doing now, opening up the Bible, telling you about Jesus, what you have the opportunity to do with people who don't know Christ, to tell them about Jesus, we have a limited window to do that, just as they have a limited window to receive it. Gospel ministry is temporary. Eternity is, well, eternal. Eternity is kind of a long time. This is important to remember. So when we're talking about these parables of judgment, this first, the parable of the 10 virgins, it's about unreadiness versus readiness in terms of wisdom versus foolish. Are you wisely preparing for the return of Christ, or are you foolishly not? Number 2, the parable of the talents speaks to reward and punishment on the day of judgment. Reward and punishment are your fill-ins for this one. Parable of the talents speaks to reward and punishment. Reward and punishment. Matthew chapter 25, once again, verses 14 through 30. For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To the one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents, and I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gathered where I have scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him, and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he who has an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast him, the worthless servant, into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So, there is a master. And this master in this parable goes on a journey. The master goes on a journey. But before he goes on a journey, he gathers his servants and he disperses resources to them so that they will do something with the resources. That's the whole point of the resourcing moment with servant 1, 2, and 3. There is an expectation immediately placed upon the servants, because if he wanted them to do nothing, he wouldn't have given them anything, right? So we have this master who gives to his servants and puts this expectation to do something with what he gives to them. And so then he leaves. And of course, the master who goes on a journey here is Christ. Christ is the master who will return, because that's what the master does in the parable. After a long time, it says, the master comes back. He has entrusted his resources to the church. He has entrusted his resources to you and to me. He has resourced us. Faithfulness to Christ is proved, not earned. Faithfulness to Christ is proved, not earned, by what is produced from the initial resource. So, Christ resources us. Christ resources us. And we don't earn something from him by doing something by the resource. That's not the point of what's going on here. We don't say, Jesus isn't like sort of like I'm neutral towards you. That's not the point of the parable, right? I'm waiting to see what you do to see if I like you or not. Not what the parable is saying. So let's kind of erase that from the picture. Because the reality is that when we get to that last servant, and that last servant hasn't done what he ought to have done, it's an indication that that servant doesn't belong and never truly was a servant of the master. That's sort of something that we need to lay a hold of before we dive further into this parable. So the master goes on a journey. He resources his servants so that they can take what he gives to them and do something with it. This is what Jesus has done with us. We are the servants. Just like we were the virgins in the last one, we're the servants in this one. And we have all been resourced in some way by our master. Now, my resources that he's given to me are not the same resources he's given to you. Right? So as you go through the New Testament and you look at the passages that talk about things like spiritual gifts, like there are some who are teachers, and there are some who are people who are good at hospitality, and there are some who do well in this area or that area or the other, but we're all members of one body who can't say to the other, I don't need you. God has resourced us all differently, but he has resourced us all. He has said to us all, here's what you have from me. And it may not be the same as somebody else, and in fact, it mostly isn't going to be. And we see that in the differentiation between how he resources one servant to another. He resources one with 5, one with 2, and one with 1. And says, well, you're able to do with this, so do with this. You're able to do with this, so you do with this. And you take that and do something with it. Okay? He resources us all. So the first 2 servants prove faithful by taking what has been given and working it to produce dividends. Right? They were given something and they put it to work. Christ's work with Christ's supply yields Christ's bounty and receives Christ's reward. That's a very simple way of understanding what Christ has done with each of us. I'll say it again. Christ's work with Christ's supply yields Christ's bounty and receives Christ's reward. Work, supply, bounty, reward. All are from Christ. Because notice this, the resources that we have are not our own. The resources that we have are not our own. Guess what? If it were not for Christ, I could not be doing what I am doing at this moment. And not just because, it took Christ to create me. That's in there too. But how did he create me? How did he make me? What has he poured into me? How has the Spirit enabled me to do the work that Christ has called me to do? Well, he gave me a voice that carries. Right? I don't need the microphone. The microphone is here because we record these things. If I didn't have the microphone, you could still hear me. I promise. Right? I've had people who are half deaf say, I appreciate that because I could hear you. Right? I've got a voice that carries. God has blessed me with that. God has blessed me with a bunch of stuff. God has blessed you with stuff. And you may not even understand all of the resources with which you have been blessed by Christ. But you have them. You have been granted them, you have been supplied them, and now you are intended to go out and produce a bounty with them. And do his work. And at the last day, when he returns, whenever that's going to be, he will reward that work. How? I don't know. I wish I could tell you. but it's a bit of a surprise. We have hints, we have bits of pictures and hints that the scriptures tell us. We get some here, like it's not just go enjoy yourself and have a nice time on a cloud with a harp, right? That's not, he says, I'm going to put you over more. Part of it is he has some additional responsibility for us in the new heavens and new earth. We have work to do in the age to come. And some of us go, oh man, work? It won't be like that. It won't be like that. Because the attitude that says, oh, work, is an attitude that will be absent from us. Because work is a good thing. It's a good thing. And yeah, it can be taxing, it can be tiring, but that which makes it sometimes a resentful experience will not be present in the world to come. It will be a good thing. And when God grants and God gives and God resources, he does it in a way that is good. And when he gives that responsibility in the age to come, whatever that's going to be, and I don't know what that's going to be, aside from some hints here where it says things like, we will reign with him. What does that mean? I don't know. But it'll be cool. It'll be amazing. It'll be wonderful. It'll be something that we can't even fathom at this moment. But it'll be good. I can tell you that now. It will be good. Because he is good. Because he is good. What he has for us will be good. So Christ's work with Christ's supply yields Christ's bounty and receives Christ's reward. The third servant proves to be a false servant by doing nothing with the master's resources and having nothing to show for his inaction. Right? We already said that with the action of giving these resources to begin with, there's an expectation that something will be done. The fact that this servant says no and goes and hides it in a hole and sits back and does nothing indicates this person he's not a servant. Because he's not serving. He's doing nothing regarding the work of God or the work of Christ, the work of the Master in the parable. His unfaithfulness is punished as those without faith in Christ will be cast away from him forever. We get that picture that we'll sometimes get in the New Testament. There's cast him into the place of outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's this picture of the Valley of Hinnom, which was on the southwest side of Jerusalem. The Valley of Hinnom is where we get the word hell from. In the New Testament, Gehenna is what we translate as hell in English, the Valley of Hinnom, Gehenna. There's a lot of similarity in those words there because they're the same place. The idea, that place though, the literal place that is used as a picture of what hell is going to be, was a place of sacrifice, like pagan child sacrifice stuff happened there. Terrible things happened there. It became a garbage dump that was a lot of the time on fire. And there were these wild dogs that would roam around the place growling because people didn't have dogs as pets. They were pests. And they would growl or cry, and they would gnash their teeth. Where there's crying or weeping and gnashing of teeth is the picture of hell. It's this place of misery, this place of torment, this place of that which is not of God. You'll be cast there. You will be ejected from the kingdom. You will not be allowed in, but you will be in a place where there is only misery. Where there's only misery. And you always have to say this about the images that the Bible gives about anything. An image is never as solid as the reality it represents. It's going to be worse than you can imagine. Just as the goodness of the kingdom is going to be far better than you can imagine, being cast away is always going to be worse than you can imagine. It's not going to be tolerable. And it doesn't mean you're poked with sticks, right? It doesn't mean that the fire is literal. Maybe it is. The point is that it is a horrible experience. And this one who is not a faithful servant, who is not a true servant, is the one who stands in for those who are not truly of the people of God. Because there's always this possibility that Jesus addressed once again in Matthew 7, There are sheep who ain't sheep, but they're wolves in sheep's clothing. They're false sheep. They never were sheep to begin with. They just sort of look like sheep. So with the virgins, that's just sort of generally all people. I think with the talents, we have people who look like servants, but not all of them are. Not all of them are. Number 3, our last point. God knows how to separate the faithful from the wicked, even when we don't. God knows how to separate the faithful from the wicked, even when we do not. Because here's the thing. We like to think we know how to make that separation sometimes. We don't. And sometimes we can. And Jesus actually said that. And then we can go back once again. Matthew 7 is kind of figuring in today, and I didn't intend it to. It's just showing up. Because it's important. You will know a tree by its fruit. So sometimes you can tell. But not in every case, as we're about to see as we read this last section. You can't always tell. But God can. God can always tell who are his and who are not. Who are truly belonging to the flock of God and who are passing themselves off as belonging even though they don't. That's always a possibility. Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46. Now this one is less of a parable than it is sort of a kind of a word picture in general. Matthew 25, starting in verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me." Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not come to visit me." Then they will also answer, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister to you?" Then he will answer them, saying, "Truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. So there's this picture of this shepherd that we begin with. So it's not technically a parable, but it's just sort of a word picture that Jesus gives to explain what this day of judgment thing is sort of how it's going to play out. And there's this picture of this shepherd, and the shepherd has an intermingled flock of sheep and a flock of goats. Now, it would be actually fairly common for a shepherd to have both of these, and they would both normally just sort of graze together during the day. But at night, what a shepherd would typically do, what was common, is that these two would be separated because they didn't belong together for various reasons. Right? Some of them was size and body heat. Some of it was, the goats don't always get along with the sheep. And not great things. Goats are a little bit kind of ornery sometimes. Has anybody ever been attacked by a goat? I have. It was like 8 or 9 or something like that. I can't remember how old I was, but my brother and I were out playing. There was this area that was kind of near a farm, and we went to the farm, and the farmer said, hey, you want to come see the animals? So we went and saw the animals, and I had my little backpack, and it was after school, and I had my lunchbox in the backpack, and probably something in that lunchbox attracted the goat, because this goat saw me, and it ran at me. And I turned around, and this thing started ramming the back of my, it's like, right? Because goats are just sort of ornery sometimes. And at the end of the day, they don't belong with the sheep. But this shepherd can look at the goats and the sheep and say, I know which is which. Do you think that the sheep and the goats kind of always know that they're different from one another? Maybe yes, maybe sometimes no. Sometimes they can't quite tell one another apart, and they think they belong together, which is why they have to be separated by the shepherd. And so there's this picture of Jesus is the shepherd, and this is a picture of himself that we get elsewhere too. He's the good shepherd. He's the shepherd who knows how to separate these two that don't belong together by the end of the day. And so he separates the sheep from the goats. And the sheep, he says, come, you're with me. I am a shepherd after all. I'm a shepherd after all. Come to me because, and he lists all of these reasons. Because I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me to drink. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you ministered to me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. He does all of these things. And the sheep who are the people of God, the true people of God, that's the people who have received eternal life from Christ, say, huh? When? When did we do this? I don't remember doing that. Do you guys? You, Phil? No? Steve? No? You? No? Nobody? When did that happen, Lord? We don't know. We don't know. When? Do tell us. When did we do this for you? Because they don't know. And some of us are serving the Lord, and we don't give it much thought or concern because, oh, well, I'm just vacuuming the church. Well, I'm just stopping by and seeing how Phil is doing. I'm just making a phone call and we add that word I'm just onto it without giving it much thought or care or concern or whatever. And we don't think much of it. But you know who does? Christ. He thinks much of it. Because he says to these sheep, these true people of God, you fed me. You gave me to drink. You clothed me. You came and saw me when I was in prison. And they say, when did we do that? And he says, that which you have done unto the least of one of these brothers of mine, you've done it to me. Now, let's analyze that for just a moment. Let's analyze that for just a moment. The least of these brothers of mine, you did it for me. So, what will sometimes happen with this passage is that this will get generalized to poor people in general, the down on their luck in general, the sick in general. That's not what he says. He identifies them specifically as brothers. So who's he talking about? Who's he talking about? He's talking about the church, the people who are his brothers. What John says at the beginning of his gospel talks about to those who did believe. He gave the right to become the children of God. Jesus Christ being Son of God, the other children of God would be his brothers and sisters. You ladies are good too, right? So what he's talking about is how the church treats itself. What he's talking about is how the church looks after its own. That which you have done under one of the least of these brothers of mine, you have done it to me. Specifically, Christians are in view because Christ is identifying himself with them as brothers. How do we and the rest of the world treat those of the household of faith? How do we do it? Do we treat each other well? Do we lift up each other when we fall down? Do we come up alongside each other when we stumble? Do we care for each other when we need it? And this isn't just, is there one person in charge of it? This is, how does everybody do this? Because it's an everybody kind of picture. How does everybody do it? Do you care for one another? Which is why we have passages like Hebrews that say, hey, don't forget, you're supposed to get together. And Jesus will say things like, love one another. There are all of these one another commands that you can't do unless you're with one another. We're meant to be with one another. We're a team. We're a family. We're on the same side. How do we treat one another? How do we treat one another? So Jesus says, that which you have done under the least of these brothers of mine, you did it to me. Because we're not just serving one another, we're serving him. That's why Christ thinks it's a big deal. That's why he calls it out as a blessed thing, as a good thing. Because by doing that, by loving them, you show that you love me. There's this moment that is all the way back at the beginning of the Bible. When God is making stuff and calling it good, he comes to this climaxing moment where he makes, on the sixth day, people. And he says, I will make them after my image and in my likeness. So when you treat another person in any way, however you treat them, you're doing that to a person who has within their blueprint and their makeup the image and likeness of God. That which you do under one of the least of these brothers of mine, you do it to me, because you're treating not just a person that way, you're treating God, Christ, that way. That's why it's a big deal. And that's why when he turns to the goats and says to the goats, go away from me, cursed, go away to the eternal fire prepared for Satan and his angels, because when I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was thirsty, you didn't give me to drink. When I was this, that, and the other, you didn't that, this, or the other. But when, Lord? Same answer, just in the negative. Because you treated my people poorly. Which, if you go all the way back to Genesis, once again, is exactly what God said he was going to do to Abraham. I'm going to make you the father of a new nation, many nations. And whoever blesses you, I will bless. And whoever curses you, I will curse. That which you have not done, at least to these brothers of mine, you did it to me too. So when the church is mistreated, when the church is reviled, when the church is oppressed, as it is in parts of the world today, as it is in minimal measure here, God doesn't miss that. He takes it into account, and that account will be brought up. So go away into eternal punishment. For those who have rejected Christ, judgment means being cast eternally into a place of God's, absent of God's goodness and blessing, where there will be only misery. This or that is what has been demanded by them the whole time. Because they have said, God, I don't want you. I'm not interested in you. Well, if you're not interested in God, you're not interested in the blessing of God. C.S. Lewis put it this way. There are two kinds of people. Those to whom say to Jesus, look to God and say, God, your will be done. And conversely, there are those to whom God looks on the last day and says to them, fine, your will be done. If you don't want me, you don't get me. Because that's what they have elected. That is what they have chosen. That's what they have said with the trajectory of their lives. When God says, I don't want you, or when they say, God, I don't want you to God, God replies, then you shall not have me. This is how God's wrath is described in Romans chapter 1. 3 times over this course of this trajectory of this passage, it says, and therefore God gave them up. So Romans 1:18, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all unrighteousness and ungodliness of men. And then it's described, God gave them up, God gave them up, God gave them up, because they gave up God. They turned their backs on God, and then God said, fine, have it your way. Have it your way. Getting it your way is not a good thing. I don't care what Burger King tells you. Your way is not a good way. His way is the only good way. It's the only good way. And then eternal life. So there's eternal punishment, and then there's eternal life. For those who are made righteous by the blood of Christ, judgment means the generous reward and blessing of life and responsibility within the new creation. The sheep and the goats separated. The goats sent away to eternal punishment. The sheep, the true people of God, sent into eternal blessedness. And we don't always know how to do that separation, which is okay because God does. And thank God that He does. He's got this. He's got this because He's sovereign over all. He's Lord over all. He can be trusted over all. So let us all turn our hearts to Him in thankfulness and worship. Let's pray. Father, thank You for the goodness of Your word, the goodness of Your Son, Jesus Christ, who saves us. Thank You for a path to You. Thank You for peace with You. Thank You for Your great grace that You give to us because, Lord, we need You. We need You so much. Thank You, God, for supplying us with what we need most, You. Thank You, God, for Your judgment. Thank You for judging us. Because in Your judgment, those of us who have placed our faith in You receive the reward that You have earned on our behalf. Not that we have earned, but that You have earned for us. Thank You, God, for that. We pray now, Father, as we turn to one last moment of worship in song, that we remember, God, how much we need You. And that we be wise and not foolish. And being wise, we receive reward and not punishment. And on that last day, may look forward to being separated out as the sheep are separated from the goats. And being brought into Your glorious presence, Your glorious kingdom, Your wonderful new creation that we cannot begin to imagine its goodness. We thank You, God, because You are so good. We pray all of this in Your name. Amen.